the guy in the middle of this is the CFO, Alan Weisselberg, and it's clear that Weisselberg cooperated on the very narrow way in the Cohen plea. Now, the question here is whether or not he's going to cooperate, widespread, because he saw or must have approved pretty much every type of expenditure that went out.
And we've continued to pull on this thread, and last night, Avenatti himself, who represents Daniels, of course, said that he has personal knowledge suggesting other payments mean other people broke the law. Do you think there are other people affiliated with the Trump organization who broke campaign finance law?
I do, because I'm aware of other payments that occurred in 15 and 16. I'm not at liberty to get into the details. My client was not alone. Ms. McDougal is not alone. There are other payments.
Not alone, in fact, accompanied by, Avenatti says, 3 other women who have claimed they also got similar hush money payments, and federal prosecutors in New York's Southern District aren't the only ones looking into those claims, but they could have access to emails, to bank records, and to much more than what we're seeing leak out publicly. I'm joined now by Natasha Bertrand, who's covered the story for The Atlantic, and former federal prosecutor Seth Waxman. Seth, what does it mean to hear that the feds are looking beyond Cohen here, and how would this go forward?
Yeah, I mean, when federal prosecutors smell blood in the water, they typically don't pack up shop and go home. So they'll do everything they can to investigate this wrongdoing. You have Mr. Cohen, obviously, that booked these transactions through the organization, called them tech services, and then the company itself calling it legal services, both monikers designed to conceal the true nature of that type of transaction. So if you take that with the Cohen plea, the Weisselberg immunity, and then you have the Trump charitable organization that's alleged by the New York Attorney General to have funneled almost $2.8 million in illegal campaign contributions to the Trump campaign. You put all that together, you mix in some emails or bank records or text messages, and if that incriminates others within the Trump organization, I would fully expect them to go after those individuals.
And Natasha, does this hit basically a bunch of nobodies of the Trump org, or does it hit some somebodies?
I think it hit some somebodies. I think it's safe to say that the president's children could have some exposure here, especially Donald Trump Jr., in a way that maybe we haven't seen in the past. But of course, this is something that the president has always been very, very worried about, is going after his finances, going after things related to the Trump organization. And it kind of brings us also back to this report that we saw recently in Bob Woodward's book about his fear that Mueller's investigators and that, federal investigators more broadly were looking into his relationship with Deutsche Bank. So,
well, let me pause you. We have that, so I'll read that part for your analysis. Woodward reporting that Trump said, look, I know my relationship with that bank. I know what I borrowed, when I borrowed it, when I paid it back. I know every goddamn one. I'm telling you, this is BS. Mueller's team saying there's nothing there. We did have subpoenas to Deutsche Bank back in the summertime, but it doesn't involve the president or his finances. Go ahead, Natasha.
Yeah, so it's not only the president that could be vulnerable to, some legal exposure here with regard to Deutsche Bank. It's also his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, also had an extensive relationship with that bank. And Trump himself still owes over $300 million to Deutsche Bank, which, of course, was involved in a major $10 billion Russian money laundering scandal. So the question, I think, that's really hanging large over people's heads is, did Trump benefit? Did anyone in his family benefit? Because this was also a bank that his family used from any of that Russian money that flowed through that bank. Why has Trump always been so cautious about, discussing his financial records, especially not releasing his tax returns, for example? So this all goes to a This all goes to a red line, of course, that Trump has said that he did not want investigators to cross.
Look, Seth, I want you to know, if Natasha were very insightful, I would be allergic to insights, and that's clearly what's going on. I think that's my first anchoring sneeze. We'll put it in a highlight reel, maybe. But my apologies for interrupting. Seth, I want to play for you something that Mr. Avenatti said yesterday, because I want you as a fair-minded prosecutor type to handicap it. He basically is arguing that some of what happened, is in the bullseye because he dealt with certain Trump org execs. Take a look.
This actually started by Donald Trump having Michael Cohen file a bogus arbitration proceeding in California using a Trump organization employee, an attorney by the name of Jill Martin, in an effort to silence and intimidate my client. They used the agreement in order to proceed with that bogus arbitration in California.
Does that have any exposure, though, or ultimately an arbitration thing can get thrown out of court? It doesn't go necessarily to the federal election issues.
No, it doesn't. But I'll tell you, as a former federal prosecutor, and when I was a federal prosecutor, it was the very rare instance. In fact, I can't think of a single instance where I investigated someone where it turned out to be the first time they had ever been involved in wrongdoing. You know, to get to the level where federal prosecutors are really bearing down on an individual, it typically, in my experience, says that there are things that had happened in the past, that, you know, that person or entity had engaged in multiple rounds of wrongdoing, and it was just finally they got caught. Of course, I'm speculating. I'm not saying that's the case here, but based on my prior experience, you know, earlier legal proceedings like that or other evidence instances of wrongdoing typically take place before federal prosecutors bear down on you.
And so, Natasha, I want to give a final question to you, which is kind of the most obvious. If you step back from all the legalese, it seems that the Trump Organization was a very sloppy place with piles of money going to different Trump-related issues, problems, and goals. And I wonder if, at the end of the day, we have a working theory of why that was, because it certainly was trying to solve problems that, in Mr. Cohen's case, but probably in Trump's as well, were made worse, not better, by the sloppy accounting and the money deals coming out of Trump org.
Right, so I think it's safe to say that the president is not necessarily a very detail-oriented person, but he is a control freak. He wants to know everything that's going on around him, especially as it relates to his money and his organization, and so he constantly felt the need to be kind of read in on everything that was happening in the organization, kind of fix this, fix that, make sure that I don't get blamed for this, but he was never really informed about the details of it, and I think that he wanted to keep it that way. He wanted to preserve this kind of arm's length plausible deniability from everything, so that, you know, something like this, if something like this happened in the future, then he could, you know, reasonably say, well, I didn't know about it or I wasn't involved. Now, of course, that is belied by the fact that some people made tapes. One of his most loyal fixers, Michael Cohen, of course, he made tapes of their conversations in which the president obviously knew.
You're putting your finger on some of the personality tension here. It's almost like someone who's really into redecorating the apartment but is colorblind. So they're all about the process, but they're not actually versed or even able to deal with, as you put it, the details.
Or now the legal consequences of that. I don't think that they ever expected to be held accountable for anything that went on, because Donald Trump, of course, was rarely actually held accountable for the legal messes that his organization got into. So now he's faced with a whole new reality, and how he confronts that, as we've seen, has been rather erratic.
Right, and as you put it, if they never got caught before, then that does potentially incent bad behavior. Natasha Bertrand and Seth Waxman, thank you both. Up next.